She vanished on her wedding day. 2 years later, her fiancé found something on Google Maps that changed everything. What began as heartbreak spiraled into obsession, as Ethan Gray refused to accept that his bride, Ava Moore, had simply run away. The dress was untouched. Her phone dead. The town whispered of cold feet, secret lovers, and nervous breakdowns. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know your thoughts about the ending in the comments. Your support helps us create more deep and gripping stories just for you. There's more to come. The morning sun spilled warmly over the quiet hills of Halden Springs, a sleepy town that had suddenly become the stage for what should have been its most joyful event in years, the wedding of Ava Moore and Ethan Gray. The venue was picture-perfect. White chairs lined up in neat rows, soft petals scattered across the aisle, and a canopy draped in silk fluttered gently in the breeze. By 9 a.m., the caterers were arriving. By 10, the first guests began to trickle in. But by 11, there was a growing tension in the air. Ava hadn't been seen since the early morning. Inside the bridal suite at the historic Linden estate, everything looked eerily untouched. The ivory wedding gown still hung on its padded hanger, its delicate lace catching the light as it swayed ever so slightly in the draft from the open window. Ava's phone lay face down on the makeup table, turned off, something no one who knew her could recall her ever doing. Her purse remained unzipped, lipstick uncapped, as though she had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. By noon, Ethan stood at the altar in full tuxedo, confusion gradually folding into dread. His best man whispered something behind him. The wedding planner made hurried calls. Guests murmured. Then, a bridesmaid entered the hall pale-faced and shaking, holding Ava's phone. It's dead. She's not answering. She's not here. Within hours, the estate was swarming with flashing cameras and whispering journalists. Runaway bride? They speculated. Cold feet? Asked one article. Secret lover? Suggested another. Much to Ethan's disgust, the police launched an initial inquiry, though they were careful not to call it a missing persons case. Not yet. Ava was an adult. She could leave if she wanted to, they reminded the public. But nothing about her absence made sense. She had chosen every detail of the wedding with care. The venue, the dress, the custom vows she had handwritten. She had sent Ethan a voice message the night before, laughing sleepily. I can't believe we're really doing this tomorrow. I love you more than anything. Now she was gone. No note. No signal. No goodbye. Ethan refused to believe she had simply walked away. She wouldn't do this, he told the police. Not to me. Not to her family. But behind his firm voice was a man cracking apart, piece by piece. He hadn't just lost a fiancé. He had lost the axis around which his life had begun to turn. Whispers followed Ava's parents, especially her mother, who seemed oddly composed. Journalists dug into her past. Her estranged sister, Laura, arrived late and left early. Some said she barely spoke to anyone at all. The town was no longer celebrating. It was watching, questioning, speculating. And Ethan? Ethan sat alone in the suite Ava had once filled with light, staring at the untouched wedding dress as if it might still hold answers. All held was silence. Somewhere between sunrise and ceremony, the bride had vanished, and no one knew why. The sterile hum of the police interview room was broken only by the tapping of Ethan's fingers against the metal table. Detective Reed sat across from him, hands folded, face unreadable. A camera blinked silently in the corner. She didn't run, Ethan said for the third time. She wouldn't. Reed tilted his head slightly. Mr. Gray, it's been 48 hours. There's no sign of struggle. Her phone was off. No note. No known threats. We have to consider. I don't care what you have to consider. Ethan cut in, his voice raw. She didn't leave me. Not like that. Reed sighed, rubbing his temple. I'm not accusing you of anything. But when an adult disappears without signs of foul play, we don't classify it as a criminal investigation. At least not yet. Then you're not looking hard enough. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot, sleepless. He hadn't gone home since the wedding morning. He'd combed the surrounding woods, talked to every vendor, every guest, reviewed security footage from the estate. Nothing. Ava had simply disappeared. Back at the Moore family home, tension simmered like a storm cloud no one wanted to name. The once bustling kitchen was quiet now. every sound awkward and brutal. Ava's mother, Margaret, sat in the breakfast nook, staring blankly into her untouched cup of tea. Her father paced the hallway, taking calls from reporters and politely declining interviews. But it was Laura, Ava's identical twin, who seemed the most unsettled. She avoided mirrors. Her voice cracked when she said Ava's name, and she rarely made eye contact with Ethan when he visited, something that hadn't gone unnoticed. They had never been close, those sisters. Laura was sharp-edged, private, while Ava radiated warmth and curiosity. Some said they were reflections in name only. Still, Laura showed up to every meeting with the detectives, though her statements were brief, clipped. "I hadn't spoken to her much the week before," she said flatly when asked about their final conversation. She was busy with the wedding. She seemed fine. When pressed, Laura insisted they hadn't argued. But Ethan remembered otherwise. He'd overheard a tense exchange between the two women at the rehearsal dinner. Low voices in the hallway, Laura's face pale with anger. When he asked Ava about it later, she had smiled tightly and said, "It's just old patterns. We'll be okay." They weren't okay now. By the end of the week, Detective Reed held a press conference. "We've exhausted all leads," he said, standing grimly at the podium. "There is currently no evidence of foul play. As such, the search will be suspended pending new information." Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, his jaw clenched, fists buried in his coat pockets. Around him, the town murmured, questions, doubts, theories. Had Ava cracked under pressure? Was there someone else? Had she planned this? 2 years had passed, but time had done little to dull the edges of Ethan Gray's grief. It had simply reshaped it, turned it from a storm into a fog, constant and quiet, clinging to everything. The world had moved on. People stopped asking questions. The articles stopped appearing. The posters curled and faded and were finally taken down. The case had never been reopened. But Ethan never stopped waiting. He still lived in the same apartment they had chosen together, a modest second-floor flat with too much light and too many shadows. The wedding photos that were never taken, the vows never spoken, had left behind a different kind of imprint. Drawers she once used, shoes she never returned for, a scar she left on the back of the couch one breezy spring day. Ethan had taken a remote position at a tech company soon after the disappearance. He couldn't face the office anymore. Not the pitying looks, the hushed voices, the colleagues who didn't know what to say and those who said too much. Working from home gave him silence and the illusion of control. Days blended into nights, broken only by emails, coding sessions, and coffee that tasted like nothing. He rarely answered calls anymore. Invitations went unopened. His friends stopped trying after the first year. Even his mother, once a daily caller, had learned to give him space he hadn't asked for. But Ethan had a ritual. Every night, after work was done and the apartment had fallen into a hush, he would sit at the small desk in the corner of the living room and open a folder labeled Ava. Inside were hundreds of digital memories, photos from their hiking trips, beach days, random breakfasts, and birthday parties. Videos where she laughed freely, her eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that still made his chest tighten. Voice messages she'd sent him late at night. "Just wanted to say I love you." That's all. He played them all on a loop, the same way someone listens to a song when they're trying to remember how it once made them feel. Sometimes he talked to her, aloud, in the dark, asking questions he knew would never be answered. He scrolled endlessly through her old social media posts, even though they never changed. He followed every update on missing persons databases, subscribed to Reddit threads dedicated to cold cases. Once a month, he wrote to Detective Reed, asking if there were any new leads. The replies were always the same. "Nothing at this time, Mr. Gray." He knew how it sounded. Obsessive. Unhealthy. He told himself he would stop. And yet, every time he tried, the thought haunted him. What if she's still out there, waiting for someone to look? On the eve of what would have been their second anniversary, Ethan sat with a bottle of unopened wine and the same unanswered question. Where did she go? And why was there still a part of him, small, stubborn, and alive, that believed she hadn't left by choice? It started as something mindless, a late-night scroll, just another way for Ethan to avoid sleep. He hadn't been trying to find anything. If anything, he was chasing memory. It was a quiet Thursday, nearly midnight. The glow from his laptop was the only light in the room. Coffee long cold sat beside him, untouched. He was clicking through Google Maps, retracing digital trails he and Ava used to dream about, remote cabins, old country roads, places they once considered escaping to, far from the noise of the world. One location in particular pulled him in, Gray Hollow, a dense patch of forest 2 hours north of Halden Springs. Ava had fallen in love with it the moment she saw the listing. "It's not much," she'd said, pointing at the screen, "but can't you just see us there? Waking up to the trees, no one around for miles." Ethan zoomed in, scanning the area, tracing the worn road that wound toward a half-forgotten property. The house had been abandoned for years. It never went on the market. Just a skeleton of someone's forgotten dream. He dragged the street view camera toward the lane, not expecting anything but the usual pixelated blur of weeds and sagging fences. But then his fingers froze. There, near the edge of the dirt driveway, stood a figure. A woman. Pale, almost colorless in the sun-bleached satellite image. She was slender, turned slightly away from the camera, but even from the low-resolution capture, something about her posture struck Ethan in the gut. She was wearing white. Not bright white, not a wedding gown, but a long, light dress that danced just slightly in the still frame, as though caught in wind. Her hair, dark and tied loosely at the nape of her neck, fell over her shoulders exactly the way Ava used to wear it when she wasn't trying. He leaned closer to the screen, heart pounding. It was ridiculous. It couldn't be her. And yet, he clicked for the next image, the next step forward on the map. The figure was gone. Nothing but the trees and the cracked pathway. Frantically, he clicked back. He checked the timestamp. Imagery captured. 11 months ago. His breath caught. That was nearly a year after Ava had disappeared. A year after the world had decided she was gone. He stared at the screen, mind racing. It could be coincidence. A trick of the light. Some other woman who just happened to resemble her. He took a screenshot, zoomed in again and again until the pixels blurred into abstraction. But even as the image distorted, his certainty only grew. It was her. It had to be. Suddenly wide awake, Ethan grabbed a notebook, scribbling down coordinates, the image link, the timestamp, the cabin's exact location, every detail. He wasn't thinking about whether this was rational. He wasn't weighing evidence. He was chasing instinct, that deep, gut-level certainty he hadn't felt in 2 years. The screenshot sat open on Ethan's desktop, magnified to the point of distortion. The woman in the image was nothing more than a blur of pixels now, a pale silhouette against the overgrown path. And yet, Ethan couldn't look away. His heart had been pounding since the moment he saw it. Not the kind of frantic panic he'd felt in the early days of Ava's disappearance, but something deeper, more focused, sharpened by hope, fueled by something that felt dangerously close to belief. He double-checked the timestamp again. Imagery captured, 11 months ago, nearly a full year after Ava had vanished, long after the case had gone cold, long after even the most hopeful had started speaking of her in the past tense. But not Ethan. He opened a map overlay tool, trying to determine exactly where the image had been taken, which angle, which turnoff, what structures were nearby. He layered it against property records, trying to determine who owned the land. It was registered to a shell corporation. No listed phone number. No updated records for years. Typical. He pulled up recent satellite imagery, trying to find a better view. Nothing more recent. He zoomed in again. The shape of the shoulders, the bend of the arm, the subtle curve of the neck. Ava had a habit of tilting her head slightly when she stood still, like she was always listening to something just beneath the noise. The woman in the image stood the same way. It couldn't be coincidence. And yet, he told himself, it could. It might be a stranger, a trick of shadow and shape, his mind playing cruel games. But then again, what if it wasn't? Ethan sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, the silence of his apartment thick around him. For 2 years, all he had was the absence, the empty spaces Ava had left behind, the unfinished wedding, the unread letters, the unanswered questions. Now, finally, he had something, a direction, a place. He opened a drawer, pulled out a worn leather notebook filled with old addresses, police contacts, numbers he hadn't called in months. He hesitated, then set it aside. No, not this time. He wasn't going to wait on red tape or plead for someone else to care. This was his. He packed a bag with the basics, flashlight, printed maps, Ava's photo, the screen capture. Something clenched inside his chest as he folded the image carefully into his coat pocket. He took one last look around the apartment, still haunted by her absence, and turned off the light. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. Not his mother. Not the police. Not even Laura. Some part of him knew this might be a mistake. But a louder part, the part still tethered to Ava by something stronger than memory, whispered, "She's out there." And if she was, Ethan was going to find her, even if it meant getting lost himself. The road narrowed the deeper Ethan drove into the woods. What started as a cracked, uneven path soon became barely more than 2 tire tracks cutting through dense trees. GPS lost signal miles back. All he had now were printed directions, his phone's flashlight, and the pin from Google Maps burned into his memory. Twilight crept in by the time he saw it, the house. It emerged from the trees like a ghost, hunched and rotting beneath ivy and rust. The roof sagged in places, windows were boarded or shattered, and the front porch leaned forward as though exhausted from holding up secrets. Ethan killed the engine and sat for a moment, staring through the windshield. His breath clouded the glass. Every instinct told him this was foolish, irrational, dangerous, even. But something else pulled stronger. He stepped out into silence. No birdsong, no breeze. Just the faint crackle of leaves beneath his boots. The air felt heavier here, charged with something he couldn't name. The front door creaked open with a slow push. The interior was cold and stale, the scent of damp wood and old earth rising to meet him. Moonlight filtered in through a broken window, painting pale lines across the floor. He moved cautiously, scanning each room. Ruined furniture, torn curtains, broken glass. But then something shifted. Not the structure, the feeling. A living presence. His eyes caught it immediately. A discarded granola bar wrapper, crumpled and recent. A plastic water bottle, not yet fully collapsed. A sleeping bag, half unrolled in the corner, dirted but functional. And on the far wall, in the faintest scratch marks, A.M. Ava Moore. His throat tightened. He stepped closer, brushing his fingers over the carved initials. She'd been here. He spun around, suddenly alert. The silence felt different now. Not empty, but expectant. Someone was watching. He stepped backward toward the door, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the broken window. And yet the hairs on his neck stood stiff. He took a breath and turned again, this time toward the staircase. The boards groaned beneath his weight as he crept upward. The hallway above was dark, narrow, heavy with the smell of rotten time. In the far corner of the upstairs landing, he saw it. A cracked window partially open, a small paper fluttering beneath a stone. He stepped closer, heart hammering, and gently picked it up. A single word, handwritten in messy, urgent strokes. Leave. Ethan sat stiffly in the dim corner of the Halden Springs Police Department, hands clasped tightly, the crumpled note with leave folded in his pocket like a relic. Across from him, Detective Reed stared with the same patient detachment he had 2 years ago, as though Ethan were a grieving man still tangled in delusion. You found initials scratched into a wall, Reed said carefully. Trash on the floor. A torn sleeping bag. Ethan, this is an old hunting shack. A dozen people could have passed through there this year. But not with her initials, Ethan snapped. Not with that note. You think I wrote it myself? Reed didn't flinch. I think grief warps things. I think people see what they want to see. Ethan stood abruptly, shaking with frustration. You didn't believe me then, and you won't believe me now. But I saw signs. Real ones. Someone's been there. She's been there. Even if it was Ava, Reed replied, sighing. What do you expect me to do? Launch a full-scale search in the woods, because you saw a blurry figure on Google Maps? We need something actionable. Ethan left the station with a mix of fury and helplessness burning in his chest. The world kept asking him to let go of a woman who never said goodbye. That evening, he stood at the edge of Ava's childhood home, the sky dimming behind tall trees and old hedges. He hadn't visited since the wedding day. The place felt heavy with things unspoken. Laura answered the door with a surprised, wary look. She hadn't changed much. Same sharp eyes, same reserved stance, arms crossed as if defending herself from the world. I wasn't expecting you, she said flatly. I need to talk. She hesitated, then let him in. Inside, The house was still preserved. Ava's pictures remained on the shelves, untouched. A strange museum of memory. They sat in the living room, across from each other like opponents. "I went to the place we talked about," Ethan began. "The cabin, where Ava wanted to buy a house." Laura's expression barely flickered. "That was a long time ago. There was a woman in a white dress," he said. "Caught on maps. Months after she disappeared. You're chasing shadows. I found her initials," he pressed. "Fresh. On the wall." Laura's jaw tightened. "Ethan, you're spiraling." "I'm getting closer." "You don't seem surprised." Laura didn't answer right away. She looked toward the fireplace, her face unreadable. Then, quietly, she said, "You're hurting. I get that. But you need to stop looking before you ruin what's left." "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, voice low. She met his eyes, something flickering just beneath her calm. "Sometimes the truth doesn't fix things. It only breaks them further." It hit Ethan like a chill. Not what she said, but how she said it. Not dismissive, not skeptical, protective. She knew something. But before he could press further, Laura stood abruptly. "I think it's time you let her rest." The next morning, Ethan returned to the apartment he and Ava once shared, or what was left of it. Most of her things had been boxed up long ago, stored in closets or pushed into corners where he wouldn't have to see them every day. But now he wanted to see. Needed to. He opened the hallway closet and pulled down the last dusty storage bin labeled AVA, personal, in her neat handwriting. It was filled with old sketchbooks, letters, some jewelry boxes, and a few worn notebooks. He froze when he saw the one with a cracked leather cover, the one she used to scribble in late at night when she thought he was asleep. Ethan took it to the kitchen table, heart racing. The first few pages were filled with half-formed poems, reminders, notes to herself about wedding preparations. But about a third of the way through, her tone shifted. "March 3rd, Laura's eyes scare me sometimes. She says she's happy for me, but I can feel something possessive beneath the smiles. Like I took something that belonged to her. Is that crazy? March 11th, she came into my room last night. Just stood there. I pretended to sleep. She whispered, 'You don't deserve him.' I thought I imagined it, until she slammed the door on the way out. March 14th, I told Mom about the dress. Laura had it altered, without asking. She said it looked better that way. It doesn't even feel like mine anymore." Ethan read each line with a growing sense of dread. The entries were sparse, fragmented. Not full confessions, but glimpses. Enough to paint a picture. There was jealousy, obsession, control. Laura had always played the role of the quieter twin, the overlooked one. Ava used to say that Laura liked being in the background, until Ava got engaged. Then things changed. He flipped further toward the end. March 19th, I don't know what's happening anymore. I feel like I'm disappearing in pieces, and no one notices but her. Maybe that's what she wants. March 22nd, if anything happens to me, don't let her speak for me. She doesn't know who I am anymore. The final entry was just a line. March 24th, I can't do this, but I won't vanish. I refuse. That was the night before the wedding. Ethan sat frozen, notebook trembling in his hands. Ava didn't run away in fear of marriage. She ran from something, or someone she once trusted, someone who wore the same face. He reached for his phone and pulled up the wedding rehearsal photos. There they were, Ava and Laura standing side by side, matching down to their hair. But Ava's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Laura's, on the other hand, was almost too wide. A tight, rehearsed grin. Was it admiration? Or possession? Ava had seen it. She felt it creeping closer with every fitting, every touch of sisterly support. Ethan flipped back to the entry where Ava wrote, I won't vanish. And yet she had. The flash drive was hidden inside a hollowed-out book, one Ava had kept on her nightstand for years. Jane Eyre, its spine cracked from rereading. Ethan found it while searching the bottom of a drawer, beneath faded photographs and dried-out pens. The modified book had a square cut out in the middle, just deep enough to hold a small USB stick wrapped in tissue. Hands trembling, he slid it into his laptop. Inside were several folders, mostly named with dates. At first, it looked like a collection of wedding planning documents, guest lists, budget trackers, scanned receipts. But one folder, labeled for later, caught his eye. Inside were 6 text files. He opened the first one, dated March 12th. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to just disappear. To vanish, not because I'm afraid of marrying Ethan, but because I'm afraid of losing myself. Or worse, someone taking my place entirely. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. He opened the second. I see the way Laura looks at me. It's not hate. It's something colder. Like she's studying me. Practicing. Like she's waiting for me to step out of the spotlight so she can step into it. The way she repeats my words. Dresses like me. Wears the perfume I told her I loved. I thought it was flattery. But now it feels like erasure. Each new file deepened the dread building in Ethan's chest. The entries weren't frantic or dramatic. They were precise, observant, eerily calm. She offered to help with the vows. When I told her I'd already written mine, she said, "Good. In case you forget them." Then she laughed. But I didn't. She's been messaging some of my friends from fake accounts. I only found out when one of them asked if I was feeling okay after our conversation. But I never had it. I think she's testing how easy it is to become me. The final file was the shortest. Just one line. If something happens, look at her hands. She never stops rehearsing mine. Ethan sat back, stunned, heart pounding. It was more than sibling rivalry. More than jealousy. Ava had sensed something deeper, something dangerous, and tried to leave clues, not loud enough to be heard immediately, but carefully placed for someone willing to listen. Someone like him. He remembered what Laura said when he confronted her days ago. Sometimes the truth doesn't fix things. It only breaks them further. And Ethan's blood ran cold as the thought finally rooted itself. What if Laura didn't just want Ava gone? What if she wanted to become her? One day before the wedding, March 24th, 10:18 p.m., Ava's journal. Final private entry. Memory frozen in time. Ava sat curled in the corner of her childhood bedroom, knees hugged to her chest, the pale glow of her laptop screen casting long shadows on the wall. The house was quiet, unnervingly so. Her parents were asleep. Laura was somewhere down the hall. But Ava could feel her, that constant presence, like static beneath her skin. She clicked open another message thread, hands trembling. It was the third conversation that didn't make sense, friends reaching out, confused, referencing things she hadn't said, advice she hadn't given, photos she hadn't sent. Laura had always been good with her voice, good at mimicking tone, expression. She had once learned Ava's signature for fun in high school, just in case we needed to switch places for a prank. Back then, it was funny. Ava stared at the screen. The most recent conversation with her college friend, Josie, stood out. "Thanks for checking in today. I knew you'd understand. Hope the wedding jitters pass. Ava." But she hadn't spoken to Josie in over a week. Her heart pounded harder as she opened her email drafts. 2 messages sat there, unsent. One addressed to Ethan. One to her mother. The subject lines, "If I disappear." She hadn't written them. The wording wasn't hers. The phrasing was wrong. Too clinical, too cold. Someone had accessed her accounts. Someone was preparing for something. She walked to the mirror across the room and stared at her reflection, but all she saw was confusion, and behind it, fear. Not for the wedding, not for Ethan, but for what was closing in around her. The past few weeks had blurred. Her things had been moved without explanation. Her phone calls interrupted. Her dress altered without permission. Laura had become constant, too helpful, too involved. And then the whispers. "You don't deserve him. You're not strong enough for this life. I've always done everything better. I've just never had the chance." Laura hadn't just envied Ava. She wanted to be her. The only thing more terrifying than being erased was knowing someone else was already stepping into your place. She packed a small bag, cash, a hoodie, a burner phone she'd bought weeks ago. No note. No final words. If she left a trail, Laura would find it. Ava slipped out through the back door, just before midnight. The wedding dress hung untouched in the closet. She never looked back. Only forward. Into the woods. Into the dark. Into uncertainty. She didn't have a plan. Only one truth pulsed in her chest. If she stayed, she wouldn't survive. If she ran, maybe, just maybe, she could reclaim her life. But first, she had to become a ghost before her sister finished the job. The road to Gray Hollow twisted like a serpent through the forest, dense with fog and silence. Ethan sat beside Detective Sarah Jennings, a former homicide investigator turned private detective, who had agreed to take on Ava's case when no one else would listen. He had shown her everything. The journal, the flash drive, the image from Google Maps, Laura's confession. And for the first time in 2 years, someone finally said the words he'd been waiting for. I believe you. Jennings didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, she tracked activity near Gray Hollow, deliveries made to an off-grid building under the name, the Repose of St. Elira. It was once a monastery, long abandoned, but recently converted into a private retreat for women fleeing trauma, with no online presence and a carefully protected location. The name had appeared in one of Ava's hidden files. Jennings pulled the SUV off the gravel road, the towering trees parting to reveal a stone structure with ivy curling up its weathered walls. It was surrounded by quiet. No signs, no visitors, just stillness. They approached the heavy wooden door. Jennings knocked. A middle-aged woman with kind but guarded eyes answered. She wore simple clothes and spoke with calm authority. "We're looking for someone," Jennings said gently. "A woman who may have come here 2 years ago under a different name." "We don't allow visitors," the woman replied cautiously. "I understand," Ethan said, stepping forward. "But please, her name is Ava Moore. I think she's been here. She's not in trouble. I just want to bring her home, if she wants that." The woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded once and disappeared inside. Minutes stretched like hours. Then footsteps. Ava emerged into the courtyard slowly, wrapped in a faded gray shawl, thinner than he remembered, her hair longer, darker at the ends. But her eyes, those deep, steady eyes, they were still hers. Ethan froze. His voice failed him. "Ava," he whispered. Her breath hitched. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him as though confirming he was real. Then, "I told myself if you ever found me, it would mean I was ready." He stepped forward slowly, heart pounding, his voice shaking. "I look for you everywhere. I never stop." Tears welled in her eyes. She let him hold her, carefully, like something fragile rediscovered. Her body trembled in his arms, but she didn't pull away. "I had to go," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "I didn't know who I was anymore. I felt erased." "I know," he said. "I saw everything. I'm so sorry." She pulled back slightly, searching his face. "Laura, she didn't win, Ava. You're still you." Ava exhaled a long, shaking breath, like letting go of 2 years of fear. "I've been safe here," she murmured. "But I'm tired of hiding." Jennings stood silently nearby, watching the reunion with quiet respect. She gave him space. "You don't have to decide anything now," she said gently. "But the world's waiting, and this time, it's yours to face on your terms." Ava nodded. She wasn't the same woman who vanished, but maybe she was finally ready to be found. And Ethan, after years of chasing ghosts, finally held her hand again, not as a memory, but as a living, breathing future. They sat across from each other in the old monastery garden, where ivy climbed the crumbling walls and wind rustled the tall grass. It was quiet here, the kind of quiet Ava had craved when she fled, and the kind that Ethan now barely noticed beneath the roar of emotions between them. She looked different. Older, perhaps. Not in years, but in weight, like time had etched something heavy into her. But her eyes still held the same depth, the same searching. Ethan spoke first, softly. "You don't have to tell me everything. Not now. I wanna," Ava said, voice thin but steady. "I've held it in too long." She paused, fingers brushing the edge of her shawl, grounding herself. "Laura came to my room. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just looked at me with this strange calm. She said, 'It's okay if you don't want to go through with it. I can help you disappear. I know how.'" Ethan's stomach twisted. He clenched his fists on his knees, but stayed silent. "I thought she was joking," Ava continued. "But then I found the emails. The messages. She had been talking to people, pretending to be me. She changed appointments, intercepted my calls. She even spoke to one of your groomsmen as me." Ava's voice caught in her throat. "She started small, wearing my perfume, borrowing my clothes. But it escalated. She altered my dress. She memorized my vows. She told me I was losing control and that she could step in, fix it. She said no one would notice." Ethan's face tightened. "I would've. I know," Ava said, eyes filling. "But she didn't believe that. She said I wasn't strong enough to handle the life ahead, and that if I tried to stop her, she'd make sure I was the one who looked unstable." Ethan blinked, stunned. "She threatened you?" She said she'd destroy everything, that she had saved copies of our private arguments, twisted them, said she'd leak them, paint me as erratic, unfit. She knew exactly what to say, how to make it believable, especially coming from a twin. Ava stared down at her hands, voice lower now. And the terrifying part, I believed she could do it. For a moment, neither spoke. The truth hung between them, cold and aching. I didn't run because I stopped loving you, she said quietly. I ran because I didn't know who I was anymore. And I didn't know if the people around me wanted me, or the version they preferred. Ethan reached across the table and gently took her hand. I wanted you. Always you. Even in silence, I never doubted it. Her eyes welled again, but this time the tears weren't only from pain. I waited for someone to see me again, to really see me. You were the only one who kept looking. He squeezed her hand, voice breaking. I couldn't stop. You were never gone for me, just out of reach. She leaned forward then, resting her forehead against his, tears slipping down her cheeks. And in her eyes at last, wasn't just fear or survival. There was truth. There was Ava. And for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't hiding anymore. When Ava stepped out of the car in Halden Springs, the town held its breath. Ethan stood beside her, not shielding her from the stairs, but grounding her, a silent promise that she wasn't alone anymore. The news of her return spread in minutes. By the time they reached her family's home, the Moore residence was already surrounded, not by paparazzi or reporters, but by something worse. Neighbors, old friends, distant relatives, all frozen in stunned disbelief. Some gasped, some wept. Her mother opened the door with shaking hands, the color draining from her face. Ava, I'm alive, Ava said softly, but I wasn't safe. Behind her mother, Laura stood motionless at the end of the hallway, gripping the banister like it was the only thing holding her upright. Her expression twisted between shock, disbelief, and something far colder, dread. Ava stepped inside, slowly, as if reclaiming space with each quiet footstep. You told them I vanished. You let them think I was weak. Laura's lips parted, but no sound came. I have your messages, Ava continued, voice calm but cutting. Your threats. Your plan to take everything that was mine. Margaret looked between her daughters in horror. Laura, is this true? Laura's voice finally found its way back. She left. I didn't force her. I tried to protect her. She was spiraling. Everyone saw it. She wasn't spiraling, Ethan said sharply. She was suffocating, and you made sure no one heard her. Police arrived less than an hour later. Detective Jennings, now working with local authorities, calmly approached the door. She had seen this coming, had prepared the warrant based on Ava's sworn statement, the evidence from the flash drive, the messages, the impersonations. Laura Moore, Jennings said, you're under arrest for obstruction of a missing person investigation, psychological coercion, and identity fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Laura didn't resist. Her face was blank now, almost serene, as if, after years of pretending, the mask had finally fused too tightly to remove. As she was let out in handcuffs, the street murmured around them, but Ava didn't flinch. She watched her sister go with a gaze that held sorrow, but no more fear. Later, inside the Moore home, the silence left behind was different. It wasn't empty. It was healing. Margaret, broken by the weight of unspoken truths, reached for Ava's hand. I should have seen it. I should have listened. Ava squeezed her mother's hand gently. We all believed what we wanted to believe, but it's time to believe something new. That night, as the town absorbed the shock, as headlines changed from missing bride presumed dead to she came back, Ava sat with Ethan in the backyard under the stars, the same sky they once dreamed under. And for the first time in years, she breathed without looking over her shoulder. She had faced the past. Now, she could finally begin again.